Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about something very real, very important. Something that shook the world and yet the world didn't speak. Let's dive into 6 powerful truths about the night Iran crushed Israel's pride and the world stayed silent. That night marked more than just a military strike. It was a symbolic moment that cracked the image of invincibility Israel had maintained for decades. For years, Israel was seen as the unmatched military force in the Middle East, backed by cutting-edge technology, powerful alliances, and an aura of superiority rooted in past victories. Its Iron Dome and multi-layered defense systems had been praised globally as impenetrable. But on that night, something shifted. Iran's retaliation wasn't just expected, it was executed with precision, scale, and a kind of boldness the world hadn't seen from Tehran in a long time. Thousands of drones and missiles were launched, some intercepted, but many reached their mark not just physically, but psychologically. The world watched, stunned, as explosions lit up the skies and questions started flooding in. How did this happen? How did a nation like Israel, often portrayed as untouchable, become so vulnerable in a single night? And more importantly, what did this mean for the future balance of power? This wasn't about winning a battle. It was about rewriting narratives. Iran's message was loud. We are no longer afraid. The very fact that Iran struck directly and not through proxy groups like Hezbollah or Hamas sent a chilling signal. It shattered assumptions. It forced analysts, governments, and citizens alike to rethink the balance of fear and control in the region. For Israel, it wasn't just a military embarrassment. It was a hit to its national pride, a deep, uncomfortable reminder that strength doesn't always equal safety, and technology doesn't always guarantee dominance. The illusion of absolute control had been punctured. The public, both within Israel and around the world, realized that deterrence had failed and that retaliation had evolved. The psychological toll was immense. Confidence, once rooted in military superiority, gave way to a new kind of uncertainty, a new vulnerability, and the silence of the international community only deepened that unease. In that silence, a question echoed, if this could happen to Israel, who's really safe anymore. That night didn't just shift military strategy, it shifted the way we see power, pride, and the limits of protection in a changing world. It reminded us that no nation, no matter how powerful, is beyond reach. The events of that night marked more than just a clash between 2 rival nations. They represented a seismic shift in the political and strategic landscape of the Middle East. For decades, the region had been shaped by a delicate balance of power, where Israel, backed by the United States and supported by advanced Western technology, stood as the dominant force. Iran, though a regional heavyweight, had traditionally resorted to indirect warfare supporting proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. Direct confrontations were rare, and full-scale retaliation was nearly unheard of. But that night, everything changed. Iran launched a direct, coordinated, and openly claimed attack on Israeli soil. This was unprecedented in recent history. It wasn't a covert operation, nor was it a deniable act of sabotage. It was a full-scale assault using drones and missiles, broadcast to the world in real time. It was bold, public, and intentional. With that act, Iran broke a long-standing unspoken rule. Don't directly engage Israel in open warfare unless you're ready for global consequences. And yet, remarkably, the global reaction was muted. What this signaled was a major transformation in the way power is wielded in the region. Iran demonstrated that it is not just a shadow actor, but a central player capable of challenging Israel head-on. It was no longer content with fighting through surrogates. It had decided to speak in its own voice. The old model of deterrence, where Israel's overwhelming force was supposed to keep opponents in check, suddenly appeared fragile. Iran had called Israel's bluff, and the world had watched silently. This shift carries profound implications for the entire Middle East. Other regional actors, from Gulf monarchies to non-state militias, will reevaluate their alliances, defense postures, and strategic bets. Nations that once relied on Israeli dominance to keep Iran at bay may now feel exposed. Conversely, Iran's allies might feel emboldened by its willingness to take risks and absorb consequences. The fear of Israeli retaliation no longer seems absolute, and that perception alone changes everything. In just one night, Iran altered how power is projected, how threats are measured, and how nations in the Middle East calculate risk. The balance has shifted, and it may never return to what it once was. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, as sirens wailed and skies lit up with intercepting missiles, a strange and unsettling quiet echoed across global capitals. There were no urgent United Nations resolutions, no emergency summits called by world powers, and no unequivocal condemnations from those who once claimed to be the guardians of international order. This silence was not just diplomatic, it was symbolic. It revealed something deeper, a global fatigue, a shifting moral compass, or perhaps a carefully calculated indifference shaped by geopolitical interests. Either way, the silence was deafening. Historically, any direct military engagement involving Israel has triggered swift international reactions. Statements of solidarity, promises of support, and calls for de-escalation have followed even the smallest skirmishes. But this time, when Iran launched a massive, deliberate, and highly visible strike, the usual voices of outrage were muted. Some nations issued vague statements urging restraint on all sides, avoiding even naming the aggressor. Others remained completely silent, preferring not to get entangled in a confrontation that didn't directly affect them. Even major Western powers, while closely monitoring the situation, avoided making bold declarations. The world watched, processed, and then moved on. This global silence has layers. For some nations, it reflects a growing weariness with Israel's prolonged conflicts in the region, especially in light of its ongoing military operations in Gaza. For others, it's a sign of shifting alliances, where economic interests with Iran, particularly in oil, and trade outweigh the diplomatic cost of staying quiet. And for many ordinary people, it illustrates how normalized violence in the Middle East has become so routine that even a large-scale attack no longer stirs public outrage or political urgency. But silence in moments like these is not neutral. It sends a message. It tells aggressors that their actions may not carry the expected international backlash. It tells victims that their suffering may be met with indifference. And it tells the world that global morality is conditional, dictated not by justice, but by convenience. The night Iran struck was not just about missiles and defense systems. It was a test of the world's conscience, and in that test, many global actors chose inaction. Silence may seem passive, but in moments of crisis, it speaks volumes, and this time, it screamed complicity. Amid the flashing headlines, political statements, and military briefings, the most important aspect of that night was quietly overlooked: the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. While world leaders debated strategies and analysts dissected defense systems, ordinary people were living a nightmare. Civilians, who had no part in the decisions that led to the violence, became the most vulnerable targets of power games played by nations. In Israel, families scrambled to shelters, holding their children tightly as sirens blared. Elderly residents, unable to move quickly, sat frozen in fear. The booming sound of explosions above their homes wasn't just an attack on infrastructure, it was a direct assault on their sense of safety and normalcy. For children, the trauma of that night will not fade quickly. The psychological scars of huddling in darkness, listening to the thunder of airstrikes, and waiting to see if they'd survive, those are things that don't make headlines. But they matter more than any missile system. Across the region, the story was no different. In Iran and other neighboring countries, civilians were also left in fear of retaliation. The anxiety wasn't limited to those under fire, but also to those dreading what might come next. Each time nations escalate, it is the innocent who carry the heaviest burden. Their homes become war zones, their futures become uncertain, and yet these faces, the scared, the wounded, the displaced, rarely make it to the front page. The media zooms in on military might, political alliances, and strategic implications, but the human cost fades into the background. Those who lose loved ones, homes, or peace of mind are quickly forgotten, replaced by new narratives and breaking news alerts. Their grief is too real, too complex, and often too inconvenient for a world obsessed with quick takes and simple headlines. This silence around civilian suffering is a tragedy in itself. When we stop acknowledging the pain of ordinary people, we dehumanize the conflict. We turn real people into numbers, statistics, and collateral damage, and in doing so, we lose touch with what really matters. Innocent lives are not side stories. They are the heart of every conflict, and until we remember that, we will continue to repeat the same mistakes, letting forgotten faces become the silent witnesses to humanity's worst decisions. In the digital age, where information travels faster than any missile and narratives are crafted in real time, the line between reality and perception has become dangerously thin. During the night of the Iran-Israel confrontation, social media lit up not with verified information, context, or compassion, but with viral clips, partisan takes, and emotional manipulation. Platforms like Instagram, X formerly Twitter, and TikTok were flooded with dramatic visuals, nationalistic slogans, and carefully edited videos that often served more to enrage or mislead than to inform. What was missing, the truth, in a world where anyone with a smartphone can become a broadcaster, the pressure to be first often outweighs the responsibility to be accurate. In the hours following the attack, misinformation spread like wildfire. Fake casualty numbers, recycled videos from past conflicts, and AI-generated images were shared thousands of times before they could be fact-checked. By the time corrections emerged, the damage was already done, opinions were formed, biases hardened, and empathy selectively applied. More troubling, however, is how social media has taught us to scroll past human suffering. A video of a child crying in a bomb shelter might trend for a few hours, only to be replaced moments later by a dance challenge, a celebrity scandal, or a meme. The algorithm rewards engagement, not depth. Grief, if not packaged in a viral format, gets buried, and the truth, complex, nuanced, uncomfortable, rarely stands a chance. Activists, journalists, and everyday people trying to share on-the-ground realities often find themselves drowned out by louder, flashier voices. Propaganda becomes entertainment. Context is lost in the flood of one-sided narratives. People don't seek truth. They seek confirmation of what they already believe. In such an environment, suffering becomes content, not cause for reflection. What we witnessed during that night wasn't just a geopolitical conflict, it was a war of narratives, fought on screens as much as in the skies, and in many ways the truth was the first casualty. The real stories, the ones about people, fear, loss, and survival, got lost in the noise. If we want to be better, not just more informed, but more humane, we need to look beyond the viral and question what we see. Because until we learn to value the truth over the trend, we'll keep mistaking spectacle for substance and performance for reality. Pride and power are two of the most intoxicating forces in global politics. Nations often stake their identity on them, defending pride at all costs and wielding power as proof of dominance. But in conflicts like the one between Iran and Israel, these very forces become double-edged swords, leading not to resolution, but to escalation. That night, as missiles flew and countermeasures fired back, what we truly witnessed was not just a military exchange, but a collision of egos shaped by history, trauma, nationalism, and ambition. And in that collision, the world chose silence, a silence that carried its own price. For Israel, the attack by Iran was more than a military threat. It was a challenge to its long-standing reputation as the region's most powerful and protected state. For a nation built on the principle of survival after centuries of persecution, pride is not just symbolic, it is existential. But pride, when wounded, often responds not with reflection, but with more force. Power demands retaliation, even when it risks wider war. On the other side, Iran's move was bold, almost theatrical. After years of sanctions, isolation, and being labeled the aggressor, Iran decided to showcase its strength. It wasn't just about responding to provocation, it was about reclaiming dignity on the world stage. To them, silence from the global community wasn't neutrality, it was validation, a subtle message that power had shifted and pride could now stand taller. But the world's silence in the face of this confrontation sent dangerous signal. It told powerful nations that they can act without consequence if the world finds it too complicated to respond. It told smaller, vulnerable populations that their lives are secondary to strategic interests. It showed that pride, when inflated and unchecked, can overrule morality, and that silence, far from being peaceful, often enables destruction. The price of silence isn't paid by politicians in press conferences or generals in command rooms. It is paid by civilians in bomb shelters, by children growing up in fear, by families forced to flee homes that will never be safe again. Silence allows injustice to deepen. It permits narratives of vengeance to grow. And in the shadow of pride and power, it ensures that lessons remain unlearned. Until the world learns to speak truth in moments of crisis, not just when it is easy or convenient, the cost of silence will only grow. Guys, we live in a world where silence can kill just as much as bombs. So if you have a voice, use it. If you care about peace, stand up not just for your side, but for what's right. This isn't just history. It's our present, and maybe our future, unless we choose to change it. Thank you.